What's up everyone? Today a different video than usual where we are still going to create 3D web content, but this time using a tool called dora.run, which allows you to create websites basically in the same way as designing a website in Figma, but then actually being able to deploy it as well. So that means that you don't have to write any code when you're using dora.run. Currently I'm showing some websites that have been created with Dora, and recently they released version alpha 2.0, which contains a bunch of new features, including support for 3D objects in your website, which is probably the reason why the creators reached out to me to try it out. And it actually surprised me in a very positive way. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to use it yourselves as well. So yeah, let's get started. When you open up dora.run, you'll get to see their website, which is built using Dora. They have a lot of features similar to Figma, but for their extra features, they added documentation, including videos and examples, as you can see here. Now, if you still have questions after reading this documentation, then you can reach out in their Discord channel as well. They are very open for questions and feedback. I asked some questions there myself as well. So yeah, in this video, we're going to recreate this landing page. Yeah, and as I mentioned before, we're not gonna have to write any code for all of this, and we're gonna be able to finish it in less than an hour. So let's get started. I opened up the project in Dora, and this is what you see when you open it up. It will immediately feel very familiar if you're familiar with Figma. So on the left and on the right side, you have those side panels. On the top, you have that top bar. And on the top, we can choose what we want to add to the scene. So let's add some text. And here it gets added to the sidebar. You can select it, drag it around. All very similar to how Figma does things. But one very cool additional feature, of course, of Dora is that you can now preview this website. So if you click on the play button on the right top, then you actually get a preview of how the website looks. Now, yeah, this isn't the most interesting website, but the fact that you can do this is really cool. You can also publish the website so that if you check this box right here, it gets published to a public URL so that other people can actually check it out as well. So now you can just share this link to anyone, to your friends or family, and they are able to check out your website. So anything that we're going to design in Dora in this video, yeah, can easily be shared with anyone that you want to share it with. Alright, so if you want to follow along, then make sure that you also open up your own Dora project. Make sure that you have the website open, and because we're going to recreate this website, we're also going to need the 3D model. And the awesome part about this website is that it's actually open source. So if you go to this GitHub page, I'll share a link to it in the description. Then you can go to the assets, and there you'll see a camera.glb. So if you select that, you can download it right here, and we can use that in our project. So that's really, really awesome. So yeah, make sure to download that, and then you can close that page, and we're going to work with those two pages. Now I'm currently working in version alpha 2.0 of Dora, which now has support for 3D objects. But before we are going to import that 3D model of the camera, let's first increase the height of the page, because yeah, in this website you can scroll down. So we want to be able to scroll down as well. So let's increase it like this. And now you get to see this blue border, which is the viewport. So that's what you're currently seeing in the screen on the current position. Now, if you click on this keyframe panel button, you can move, let's say, the scroll position. So currently we're on 0, which means we're on the top of the page. But if you move it down, you'll see that the viewport moves down as well. So if we're adding elements lower here, you'll only see them when you scroll down, of course. Now the next thing we're going to do is add a 3D model to this viewport. So if you click the 3D cube on the top and you drag it onto the view, then you get this button where you can import a 3D model. Let's select the camera that we just downloaded, and you get to see like a scene where you can rotate around with your left mouse button, or pan around or zoom in or out with your other mouse buttons. And we can actually make it look very similar to how it looks right here. But we need to make sure that it fills the entire screen, or the entire viewport. And it can actually go slightly over it, because that's okay. So let's do it like this. But now one thing that we introduced right here, an issue, is that the camera will currently be shown here. I can actually demo this. If we show the demo, it will take a little bit of time to download this model because it's quite big. Okay, there it is. Yeah, now you see that the camera is currently there, but if we scroll down like this, then you'll see that the camera disappears. But we want the camera to stay in the screen when we scroll down. And the way we can do that is by snapping or constraining the 3D widget that we added to the viewport. So basically what that means is that it will always stay at the position of the viewport. So the way we can do that is by clicking on this little circle on the top and snapping it onto the viewport like this. Now we can do the same on the bottom and on the left and the right. And now it will automatically be centered because we connected all 4 sides right here. And if we are scrolling down, we can actually also see that here. If we scroll down with this timeline, you'll see that the camera moves along. So if we now refresh this preview page, you'll see that that happens here as well. I'm currently scrolling, and you see that the camera isn't moving at all because it's following the viewport. Okay, now let's try to get this camera at the correct position and rotation, just like it is right here. So if we double click on this 3D viewport, then you actually go to like the edit mode of the widget. So if we zoom in and use our right mouse button to move the camera a little bit as well, like this. All right, there we go. This looks very similar to how it looks in the website. So if we now refresh the page, you'll see that it looks quite similar to this as well. Now, one of the coolest features in this website is, of course, the animated 3D models on scroll. So whenever you scroll, it starts to move. So let's try to implement that as well in Dora. So when you scroll down, we move the camera to the left and we slightly change the angle. And the way to do that in Dora is using keyframes. So we already added this keyframe panel right on the bottom using this button right here. If you don't have it selected, then click it once and it will appear. So the way we can do this is by adding multiple keyframes, where the initial keyframe should start at keyframe 0. So that means that when we're on the top of the page, the camera, the default camera, which is not the model actually, it's the camera of the scene, which is showing this result. It should have this position. So let's say on keyframe 100, when we scroll down this far, we want the camera to have a different position and rotation so that it looks like this 3D model is on the left side of the screen. So we're going to add an additional keyframe right here and then just move around like this. Maybe zoom in or out. And there we go. So if you would check the result now, we can do that by changing this keyframe right here. You'll see that it is slowly moving from the one position and rotation to the other. Once it's at keyframe 100, from there on it will stay at the same position if we don't add any additional keyframes. So yeah, that's really awesome. Without any code, we can already achieve this much. It's really cool. Now there is currently one issue though, and that is that in the preview this all looks fine, but when we change the size to the actual size of our screen, so that's the actual size 100%, you'll see that it doesn't fit right here. Now you can also actually see that if you go to the published website, it will not look exactly the same, but you'll see that also here it becomes too big, and if you scroll down, like right here, the camera is already leaving the screen, even though in our project we never made it, we never put it out of the screen right here. So we should fix that. And the way to do that is by changing the 3D widget to fill the viewport instead of giving it a fixed width and height like we did right now, because if you give it a fixed width and a height, it's not going to be responsive. So let's change that to fill space for both the horizontal and vertically. And now if we check the page right here, let's check the public URL. And there we go. And now it will stay in the screen. Maybe we're not using all sides of the screen, but that's because the viewport here is not having the exact same aspect ratio as right here. This is just to make sure that it's compatible for all screen sizes. Alright, now what I like to do is once the camera or when the 3D object reaches the specific position, I'd like to keep it that way for about 30 frames or 30 keyframes, so that when the user is scrolling down, it can actually get to see the camera at that angle for a little bit before it goes on to the next animation. So let's add 30 keyframes for that. And then from there on, we can move over to the next position, which is going to look like this. Okay, so let's move on 100 keyframes for that and add another keyframe and get it into the right position as we want. We want to look at it from above, basically like this. Alright, now for the next rotation, let's move over to keyframe 330. I'll need to zoom in for this one. Right here, add the additional keyframe and select the default camera again, and let's move it over to this specific position. Okay, something like this. Let's add an additional keyframe at 360 to keep it on the same spot for a while. Now you might have noticed that in the original website, the different 3D or the different lenses are all separated from each other, and they are kind of leaving the lens. But I'm not able to do that in this video because that's going to take too much time. But the way we could do that is by selecting one part of the 3D model. So yeah, we'll have to figure out which parts exactly. But for example, right here I have a sphere. So we could also animate this specific sphere by adding a keyframe for this one. So for example, a keyframe here, and then a keyframe at 330, and slightly move this single lens out of the original camera. So this way you can basically create the exact same situation as we have right here. But yeah, that will just take too much time, so I won't do that in this video. But feel free to do it yourself. And then we have one last animation left, which is this one where we move in front of the camera. So let's add an additional keyframe at 460, where we're going to change the camera again and move it to about this angle. Okay, there we go. Now, we don't need to add an additional 30 keyframes right here because this is actually the end of the page. So all the extra space that we have here, we can remove that and change it to the end of the viewport right here. So let's check out how this looks. And let's actually do that in the public URL. All right, now if I'm going to scroll, you'll see that here there's a slight gap where the camera doesn't move because we added that. The next animation, apparently we forgot the gap right here, so I'll add that. Yeah, that's this one. So what I'm going to do is add an additional keyframe at 260, and that should already fix it automatically. But we want to move those keyframes 30 keyframes ahead. So I'll just do that manually. All right, I moved them all over for 30 keyframes. Let's check it once again. All right, this looks good. Well, this is quite an interesting transition, but I like it. So let's keep it this way. Why not? And here we have the final position. Yeah, that looks really awesome. We're still going to add all the 2D elements. It doesn't look exactly as how it looks in the original website. And that's mostly because of the HDRI that this original website is using, which is currently not supported by Dora yet. But they are going to add support for this in their beta release. So yeah, definitely stay tuned for that. I actually got an example right here of how it looks without any HDRI, which is quite similar to how it looks in our website. And then when you select an HDRI, like I don't know, a random one, you'll see that, for example, the lens looks way better right now compared to if we don't add any HDRI. So yeah, that will already dramatically improve the website even further. But besides that, it already looks so cool for such little effort, in my opinion. So yeah, let's start working with the 2D elements now. Okay, now let's start with the header of the original website, which contains the logo on the left top. And aligned to that, they have three menu items on the right top, which have an on hover effect. So we're going to implement this as well. So let's go to the to Dora and add a container where we're going to add all of those elements into. And let's remove the fill because the fill makes it yeah, blue, but we wanted the container to be transparent. and then add in the text ourselves. So let's add a text called canon. There it is. Now let's change the font. You can choose any font that you want, of course, but for this title I chose Fugas 1 because I found it cool. And let's increase the font size to, let's say, 60 or something. Now I also got the hexadecimal value of that red color that they are using in the original website, so let me copy that over here. This is the value. And there we go. Now, this text is currently part of the parent container, but it's not centered in the container, so let's do that. So if we move it, you'll see that it automatically snaps, which is great, but we can actually also make sure that it's always vertically centered in that container by pressing Control, which will show those arrow indicators on the top of the bottom and the bottom. And if you release, it will automatically add the constraints for the top and bottom. So whenever we try to move this text, you'll see no matter where I drag, it will always stay vertically centered in that container, which is pretty cool, so that we can align it perfectly with the other 3 menu items on the right. Talking about those menu items, they are all pretty similar in that they have a hover effect, which is the same. So for that, we can actually use a feature of Dora called components, so that we don't have to add this the styling for every single element, but we can just do it once and reuse that component multiple times. So let's add a component for that and rename it to menu button. And this is the default component, just a white square. We're going to change it, make it smaller, and yeah, we actually don't need this white square initially. Initially, it should just be text. So let's make that transparent, like this. And let's add an text field inside of here, like this. And the original text, we can name it features. Now, we don't want the text to be this big, so let's change that to, let's say, 24, and make sure that it hugs the content, and center that inside of the components, and add the constraint with the control key once again. Now for this font, we're going to use Gidea because I like that one as well. And let's make it black. All right, there we go. I think the font's a little bit small, so let's change it to 34. Okay, there we go. Now the next thing we can add is the hover state. And the way we can do that is by adding this second, yeah, let's say state of this component. So click it and it will automatically appear right here. By default, it will have a name of state 1. So let's rename it to hover so that we know what it means. And instead of a black text, we want the text to be white in that case and give it a black background. So let's change that. Let me see. We need to select the text, change it to white, and then give it a fill of black with full opacity. Now it's currently a square while it is rounded in the original website. So let's change the border radius to a maximum value, which will automatically round it as far as possible on the shortest side of the container, which will give like a pill effect. And yeah, there we go. Now it doesn't know how to transition or when to transition from the default state to the hover state because we didn't tell Dora when to do this. So for that, there's this little icon right here, which we can click and drag to the hover state. And this will open up some panel where we can change some values. So for example, when it should change from this state to this state, and that should be when this component is entered with the mouse, then it should move the state to hover. And whenever the mouse leaves this component, it should move back to the default state. Now currently it has an animation of 200 milliseconds. Let's change that to 500, a little bit longer. And yeah, that's all. Now let's do the same the other way around. And instead of mouse enter, we add mouse leave. Also 500 milliseconds. And there we go. Now if we go to the page, we can now, if we go to the components tab, we can add one of those menu buttons into the scene. And let's center it like this. Now if we check it out, let's refresh. You'll see that when I hover it, it will actually change. And that's exactly the same as in the original website. Now of course it's too big, but we can change that. So let's go back to the component again and make it quite a bit smaller. And change the text size as well. And let's copy over the width and height for the hover state as well. And the font size. There we go. Now let's remove this component and add a new one. Oh yeah, we need to add it into the scene. And there we go. It's automatically inside of the container right here. And this size looks a lot better. Now let's add another one and a third one. Now it would be nice if we can space those evenly so that the distance between each of those buttons is exactly the same. Now this is not possible with snapping, but if we select all three of those menu buttons, let's move this one inside the container as well and order them correctly. So this should be the correct order. If we select all three, we have this option right here to distribute horizontal spacing, and that should space them evenly. It adds those constraints right here. Now we can also add constraints for the top and bottom by vertically aligning them. So now they will always be aligned equally. Now this one doesn't have any alignment for vertical alignment, but we can align this one to the parent container like this. So now we are totally sure if we want to move any of those buttons, we're actually moving all three and they will always stay in the center of this container. Awesome. Let's check out how it looks. And there we go. Now let's give them each their own text. So experience it and buy now. And I'm not going into the details of the exact same size of, for example, those buttons. I could make them a lot smaller, but yeah, I don't think that's really part of the this video. It's just to show the capabilities, and yeah, this is such capability. Now, if we scroll down, you'll see that it automatically goes up, which is actually the same as it's doing right here. So we don't have to make any changes for that. For the next parts, we're actually going to have to move them to the left and right and slowly make them disappear. But for the top, we can just keep it as it is right now. Okay, so in the background, I've been adding 3 additional text here. I don't want to spend too much time on how to add those texts because that will be quite repetitive. But one important thing to notice is that in this viewport, it might seem like it's positioned right here like this. But if you go to the actual website, which has a different aspect ratio, because my screen is a different aspect ratio than this viewport right here, you will see that it's moved further down. So we should take that into account, and we can do that actually. So if we would group those texts right here into a container, and let's actually rename it. I'll first rename this one to the header, and then rename this one to always shoot like a pro. Now if we connect it to the viewport top and the viewport bottom, like this, it will be centered. But we can actually move the content inside of here. So we can increase the height of the container, and therefore we move this up as well. And now it will always be, let's say relative to the viewport, it will be a little bit above the center of the screen. So if we now reload this page, you'll see that it's slightly above. Maybe this is a little bit too much. One thing that is currently not supported in Dora yet is changing the font size depending on the screen size. So currently we cannot make it slightly bigger or smaller depending on how big the screen is. Let me move it down a little bit. But that will also be supported soon. I believe that will be in the beta release as well. But yeah, for now this looks quite okay. Let's move over to the button, the No More button, which has a hover effect as well. And this red type of button is also on the bottom of this page. So we're going to create a component for that one as well. So let's add a red button component right here. Lower the size. Increase the border radius again, so it looks like a pill. And instead of giving it a white fill, we're going to give it a gradient. So because this one is also a gradient with a darker red bottom color on the bottom left and a light pinkish color on the right top. So we're going to do that as well. And let's change the rotation slightly of this so that it comes from the left top and it goes to the right bottom. It comes from the left bottom and it goes to the right top, sorry. And increase the opacity, because by default one of the two values will have an opacity of 0, but we want both of them to be 100%. And let's use this hexadecimal code, or any you want actually, for the left bottom. And let me copy over the other one. You can just select it right here, so you're sure that it will be the one on the right top, and then set the value to this hexadecimal value, and you'll see that it gets like this pinkish color. Now we're also going to add a white text in there. No more. This is a little bit too big. Let's make it, I don't know, 28. That looks better. Press Ctrl and it will automatically snap. And let's make it white. There we go. Now let's add the hover state for this button as well. But one thing to notice is that currently the effect that we see right here is supported by Dora. So we can add an effect here, which is called the drop shadow. And you can already see that there's a slight shadow right here. We can change the color of that and make it bigger, but unfortunately right now it's not supported to animate that. So I won't be showing that one because the animation won't look as good as it does on the original website. But they're going to add support for that as well. Now instead of that, I'm going to just increase the button size slightly, something like this. And let's add the event right here when the mouse is entered. And let's go back to the default when you leave with the mouse. Now if we go back to the pages and we add this new component. Oh, hang on. There we go. And we are going to check it out. one thing you'll notice, we still need to add it to this container right here. But one thing you'll notice is that if I hover it, that it increases in size to the right bottom. So the left top is like its pivot point, and it increases to the right bottom. We don't want that. We want it to have the pivot point in the center of the button. But that's not actually possible in the reusable component itself, because when we try to increase the size right here, it will actually increase on the right bottom. So what we can do instead, we can add a additional container around this button and make the button center this container, so that now it will always stay in the center of this parent container because of the constraint that we added with the control key. Now let's remove the fill of that container so that we don't see it anymore. Now I also added the container to the always shoot like a pro parent container, so that it's also closer to that text. So if we refresh now and we hover, you'll see that it actually increases in size in the with the center as the pivot point. Cool. And the next thing we're going to look at is this container, which needs to slightly move out of the page, just like it does right here, with the opacity lowering down to 0 slowly. And the way to do that is it's basically the same as what we did with the camera. We need to add a keyframe, and we want it to be gone right before the camera is at the next position. So for example, at keyframe 80, let's make sure that it completely disappeared by then by changing the opacity to 0. And let's change the position. I'm using the arrow keys right now with shift hold down. Let's move it outside of the screen, maybe not entirely, something like this. And if we move the keyframes like this, you'll see that it slowly disappears to the right, just as it does in the live version. Now we need it to stay away from here on. And now if we would check this out in the page, then if we scroll down, you'll see that it slowly disappears. Awesome. Now let's do the same for that bottom. Start scrolling to explore text and the arrow, because if you scroll down here, it will also move out of the screen, but instead it will go down. But besides that, it will be exactly the same. Alright, so now I added the start scrolling to explore container as well. I didn't record this because it would get quite repetitive once again. But basically what we did right here is we created a container with the text inside of there, and a container with a high border radius so that it's circled, and instead of giving it a fill, which is a background color, I give it a stroke, a gray stroke, which made it a circle like this. Now currently Dora doesn't support icons like this arrow right here, so I didn't include this, but yeah, I'm sure that will be supported in the future as well. So maybe when you're watching this video, you can actually import an icon. Now to make sure that both of them are centered, I added constraints to the container for both the elements. So they should both be centered in the container, and therefore they are perfectly aligned to each other. And the container itself is constrained to the viewport, so that it will stay on the bottom, and when we start scrolling down with the keyframes, you'll see that I move the position of this container all the way down until here, and I change the opacity to 0%. Here you can see it's slowly decreasing until here, which gives a result that looks like this. Awesome. Okay, now for the next part, I already added the text, but I didn't add the animation or the images yet. So we're still gonna have to add this image right here and this small YouTube image as well, or this video image. And we're gonna have to add the animation where it first it slowly fades in, and then it scrolls to the top and disappears there. So let's start with the images actually. And we can do that. We can add an image by just selecting the image on the top and dragging it to, yeah, basically to the size that we want. This seems pretty good. So let's upload the image, which you can actually find in the GitHub page where we also got the 3D object from. So yeah, go there and get the image and increase the border radius slightly so that it doesn't look so squared, but it has like those soft edges just as it does here. Now let's do the same right here for the video icon and upload that as well. Let me zoom in a little bit, make sure that it looks okay, and center it like this. Now, once again, make sure that everything that's in here looks well on different screen sizes, because currently it looks well in this editor, in the viewport right here, but that's with this specific aspect ratio. So let's take a look how it looks right here. And that looks pretty good. So let's keep it the way it is right now. And let's move everything inside of a single container so that just as in the original website, we can make it appear as a whole. So for that, once again, we can use the container selection. Let's give it a name, outstanding performance. And now we can actually animate, for example, this entire container. Let's make sure that it's connected to the viewport as well, so that anytime that we are scrolling down, that it's staying at the position. Now, you could argue if that's the correct way to do it here, because from here on it will actually move up. But I think because we want to give it this smooth animation from the right to the left, that it's best to use this to connect it to the viewport. So we want it to move in there, whoops, while other elements are moving out of the screen. We just want to start the animation slightly later than that the other elements are disappearing from the screen. So let's start at frame 20. Select the outstanding performance container and add a keyframe. Right here, it should be outside of the screen. So move it out there. Like this. And once we're at the correct position with the camera, with the 3D model, we want it to be inside of the screen, like this. And make sure that we set the opacity initially to 0% so that it slowly shows up, which will give us a result that looks like the following. And there we go, it's slowly appearing. Now you can see, because I added this constraint with the viewport top, that it's now moved down. So let's make sure that's fixed as well. Well, first of all, we can slightly increase the height. So let's move it to an offset of 100 from the top of the viewport. And we'll have to change that on the end frame as well then, actually, because otherwise it's going to move down while we are scrolling. So that will already increase it, but maybe it's also a little bit too big. So let's check out how it looks right now. Okay, this looks good. Let's keep it this way. Now, once again, currently we cannot change the font size depending on the screen size. That's something that's going to be supported soon. So for now, we're gonna have to deal with that. But this looks great. So let's make sure that this element stays in the screen for about 30 frames, just like the camera that isn't moving. I see I slightly moved this breakpoint right here, which should be on 100. So let's move it there and actually do the same for this one. There we go. And let's add an additional breakpoint right here on 130 so that it stays on the correct position for then until then. And from here on, we want it to move up, and we want it to be gone before the camera reaches the next position. So let's say around 210. We want to add an additional keyframe, move this container up until about here, let's say, and change the opacity to 0, so it should be completely gone. Now let's check this out. Alright, now it's here. If we scroll down, it's staying on the right position, and when we keep going, it is slowly disappearing. Awesome. Okay, now for the rest of the website, so for those elements, and if you scroll down, this as well, and the last part with the explore button, I fast forward everything so that you didn't have to see me implement all of this, but let's go over all the changes that I made to get this all to work. So what I added is those two elements right here, feature that brings you power, which is the container for all of this, and the image separately. Now I didn't put those two together in a single container, even though they are both moving upwards in the viewport. So if you look like here, you'll see that they move at the same speed up and down. But you might also see that this one is going to the left while this one is going to the right. So we would still have to do separate animations for that anyways. So I kept them separate and didn't put them in one container. And the way they are currently animated is just a similar way with keyframes starting while the camera is moving towards its next position. And the keyframe is ending when the camera right here is also at its final position. So they should both be at their final position at the same exact keyframe. So it's scrolling down, and right here it should stick at its position for about 30 frames. And from there on, I added an additional keyframe after that, which makes the image and the container move upward and make it disappear with an opacity of 0. So that's that, and that will give you a result that looks like this. Let me take the scroll bar right here. So we go from this to the next position and it starts to appear. It stays at the same position for a while and then it goes up and it disappears. And as you'll see, after that, the smart speedy autofocus text slowly fades in, which is the next part right here that starts immediately when the other elements are gone. So those disappear, and at that moment, the next one, let me select it, it's right there, is slowly appearing, staying at the same position for a while. And I kept it centered with the constraint on the left and the right connected to the viewport, and also connected the top to the viewport, so it's staying in the view. And then from here on, when the camera starts moving again, I made it fade out slowly. Now, if you're wondering why this camera is making this interesting animation, I found it pretty cool, so I kept it. But this is because the camera, let's go there, because the keyframe changed from a quite low rotation right here to a rotation which is much lower for the X, but much higher for the Z. So yeah, you can rotate it in multiple ways to get the same result. We could increase this even further, and then the animation would look even crazier. But yeah, so we could fix this, but yeah, I'll keep it this way because I think it's a nice feature. And then from there on, the text, the smart speedy autofocus is disappearing. And once it's gone, basically, Whoops, I didn't mean to add this keyframe right here. Once it's gone, this interactive 3D gallery will start to appear, which is a container with some text and the component that we created before. And I changed the text of that component. And that's actually everything, which gives a final result. Let's go from top to bottom one last time of the following. A great animation right here, with the possibility to extend this to to disassemble the lens basically. And there we go, final results with the hover effect on the Explorer. So yeah, that's everything. Now, currently, if we would try this out on mobile, there is actually an option for this. By default, it will go to desktop, but we can change it to a lot of different devices. So if we would change it to mobile, for example, you'll see that it doesn't look that good. And there is actually a breakpoint feature in Dora for this. So if we go back to the Dora project, you'll see on the right side there's a mobile breakpoint section right here, and if you click the plus button, it will create a second page, which I'll rename to mobile. And in here we can basically recreate this scene, but make it look better on a smaller aspect ratio. So I mentioned before that it's not possible to change the font size on different screen sizes, but it is possible to change it for a mobile screen. So there's a specific breakpoint right there, but that's currently the only breakpoint that's supported. But with the beta release, there should come a lot more breakpoints, so that even on tablets, for example, or very big screens or very small ones, it should all look great. Now, I won't implement this entire mobile page, of course, because it's going to be the exact same process as we did so far, just with a different aspect ratio. But you get the idea, and you could try it out yourself if you want to create a 3D website without writing any code. Now, I do want to mention one last thing, and that is that it is possible to share your own project in Dora. So I'm going to leave a link to this current project in the description of this video, so that you can copy it and you can try it out yourself. See if you can replicate a website like this, or maybe you have a different idea that you want to implement. So yeah, go ahead and use it. Now, after recording all of this, I still figured out one bug in our website, which is when you change from desktop to a different size, for example, the MacBook Air, you'll see that some components are outside of the screen, like here, or when you move down, this one as well. And that is because those are not, let's say, positioned from the right side of the screen. They are positioned based on this container, and this container is positioned based on the left side of the screen. So what we can do is connect it to the sides of the screen, this container, to make sure that it's centered, and make it fill the entire screen. So it doesn't matter what size the screen is, it will always be the entire size of the screen. And that way we can now position the menu items relative to the right side of that of this container, and we can do the same with the left side and move it slightly to the right. And now if you refresh, you'll see that it fits better in the screen again on the MacBook Air as well. And if you move back to desktop, you'll see that it fits well here as well. And it's actually exactly the same reason for the other cases down here when you scroll down. So I'm not going to show this in the video, but I will make sure that it's added in the link to this project that I'm going to share in the description. So if you want to check it out, then feel free to check out that link. And with that, I want to thank you all for watching this video. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.